All right, next up in our NFC South preview is the New Orleans Saints, who have a brand new head coach in 2025 in Kellen Moore, who's taking over that job right now. The Saints went 5-12 last season. We gave New Orleans a C+ for their draft and a B- for free agency. So it's kind of a so-so offseason for New Orleans. But Dolan, what is the biggest strength for New Orleans right now?
So the biggest strength, and the problem with this is there is a whole lot of ifs here. But I think if and when they're ever all healthy, the Saints do have a pretty respectable core of pass catchers, right, for whoever their quarterback is going to be. Chris Olave is one of the best receivers in football, obviously had the concussion issues last year. Rashid Shaheed is a really good deep threat. He had a torn ACL last year. He's recovering from that. Brandon Cooks is obviously a solid veteran and a known deep threat. He wasn't great in Dallas last year, kind of a drop-off, but we'll see what he can give them in his second stint in New Orleans. An interesting group of tight ends, albeit an injured group of tight ends. Jawan Johnson is a respectable guy who just got a contract extension. Foster Moreau and Taysom Hill are both solid weapons, but Kellen Moore even just said recently that he doesn't really have a timetable for when they're going to play, considering their season-ending injuries they suffered last year. And Alvin Kamara, of course, is one of the constants on this team, still one of the most reliable pass-catching backs in the NFL. Maybe not quite as explosive as he used to be, but still very, very reliable. So if they can get most or all of these guys healthy, they do have a decent set of weapons to work with in the passing game, but the health is really the question with a lot of these players.
So the biggest question mark for New Orleans is their quarterback situation, but we'll talk about that in a second. The other one on a spotlight here is the run defense, because they were the second worst run defense grade as a team in the NFL. Really, their D tackles really struggled last year. None of their 4 qualified D tackles last year had even above a 50 run defense grade that they have. So again, they didn't really do much in free agency to address that issue either, or much in the draft either. So yes, quarterback is the biggest question mark, considering we have no idea who's going to start a quarterback for New Orleans in week 1, but run defense right now is also a big question mark.
You know, this is going to sound so funky. You remember Spider-Man 2, right? The Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, right? You know, the scene when the train is about to go off the tracks and he's on the front of the train with the webs and all of that. I feel like last year, the Saints' run defense was the train going off the tracks, and Spider-Man was Demario Davis. That's essentially what their run defense was. It was just Demario Davis trying to hold it all together because his D-line just could not get it done. But yeah, tied with Dallas for the second lowest run defense grade in the league last season, only ahead of the division rival Carolina Panthers. And it's just too many games, right, when they play Atlanta and they just have that offensive line leaning on them. Even a game against, what was the game against the Bucs when that was the game Sean Tucker went off. Your guy Sean Tucker went off for, 150-something yards or whatever. That, I mean, it was just every single week New Orleans was one of those teams where you knew you could walk in and run the football. Their D-line especially has got to be a lot better to free up, because it's a pretty good pair of linebackers they have in Davis and Werner, but their D-line's got to be a whole lot better in run defense.
Yeah, they really do. All right, for the quarterback spotlight, tell me more about Tyler Shuck, who was their second-round pick out of Louisville. But also, I want you to tell me a little bit about Spencer Rattler, because we really have no idea between those two who's going to start week 1.
Yeah, it's between New Orleans and Cleveland right now. These are easily the 2 shakiest quarterback situations in the NFL. Tyler Shuck, obviously last year in his 7th college football season at his 3rd school after Oregon and Texas Tech, 1 year at Louisville under Jeff Brom, and he was really good. I think his strengths are that when he's clean in the pocket, he can make throws, especially vertically outside the numbers. I think he's one of those go ball specialists that we see so much in college football now. Really good turnover-worthy play rate, 1.7% last year. That was easily the best of his career, but the 2 things that worry you about Shuck are not a whole lot of ability to improvise outside the pocket, especially with some of the injuries that he's had in the past. It's kind of taken that ability away a little bit. He's going to be 26 years old next month, early in his rookie season. So you go, okay, the Saints are taking a chance really on an older prospect here. And, from what I saw in the preseason game from him, it was very outside of the 1 touchdown that he threw right after a pick 6, it was extremely conservative. Spencer Rattler the same way, extremely conservative. We saw some good things out of him last year, but had a hard time really consistently putting things together for an entire game. And I just think these two, I don't know, man. I just think this situation, because they don't even have a veteran like a Joe Flacco in Cleveland that they can go, okay, he can at least hold the fort down for a bit, and he's out there and he really knows what he's doing with so many years of experience. This is wide open. It even sounds like from some reports lately that Rattler is the one winning the job, which would concern me a little bit, using a top 40 pick on Tyler Shuck, and then Spencer Rattler's going to win the job anyway. But there's a lot to build on this offense. But to me, this is arguably the shakiest quarterback situation in the entire league. If the pass protection is better than it was last year, because they were last in pass blocking grade, maybe one of them can succeed, right? They need the weapons healthy. That was an issue last year as well. There was so much that went wrong in this Saints offense last year. And now you've got this as your quarterback situation. It's really tough to project right now.
Because at least in Indy and at least in Cleveland, like you mentioned, they have at least Daniel Jones and Joe Flacco will give you some sort of floor. In New Orleans right now, it's two complete rolls of the dice in Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shuck too. So I'm with you, man. I think this is the worst quarterback situation we have in the entire NFL right now. Someone who could help out both of them, though, is Chris Olave, who has battled a lot of injuries in his career, the former first-round pick out of Ohio State. But in his first 3 seasons, he's had grades above an 82 in receiving grade in each of those first 3 years. He suffered his second concussion last year in week 9. So really got banged up for the rest of the year because of that. But when he's healthy, he's one of the best route runners in the NFL who could dominate in the short or intermediate or even deep range of the field too. Chris Olave is a very, very good receiver, just has to stay on the field.
You talk about consistency. How about the 3 receiving grades that he's put up in 3 years? 82.9, 82.9, 83. It doesn't get much more consistent than that. And I know we talk a lot about his Ohio State teammate in the same draft class with the New York Jets, Garrett Wilson, but Olave is just as good. It's just that the Saints' offensive situation has not been, it's not been much better than the Jets, but it hasn't been great either. So you talk about Olave, especially vertically, one of the best route runners in the league, one of the best playmakers in the league, just got to stay on the field this year.
So tell me more about Spider-Man for the Saints defense and Demario Davis.
Yeah, look, he's 35 years old last year, and I would argue he was still their best defensive player. 80.2 run defense grade, still 17th in the NFL last season. 6 straight seasons of at least 1,000 snaps played, most of those as a top 5 or 6 linebacker. There was a little drop-off last year, especially early in the season in coverage, and then around week 7 or 8, he really started to pick things up, and he looked like Demario Davis. This guy, look, even going into his age 36 season, you can't really doubt his ability. Ever since he's been in New Orleans, he's been one of the league's elite linebackers, and he's the captain, he's the heart and soul of their defense, and he's the glue that's trying to hold this whole darn thing together, because there's been a lot of guys around him struggling, but he's somebody who just can, what you're getting out of every single week. If there's any sort of decline from Demario Davis at some point, I get really, really worried, but we haven't seen much of that yet.
The rookie to watch for me is other than Tyler Shuck, really, is Kelvin Banks, who was their top 10 pick at offensive tackle from Texas. I love Banks, man. I thought he was the best tackle, actually, in last year's draft, over Will Campbell, over Armand Membu, over all those guys. I was a huge fan of Banks over the course of his career, really, at Texas. He started at left tackle as a true freshman that year. Will Anderson Jr., they actually asked Will Anderson Jr., who was the toughest player you've ever played against in your college career? He said Kelvin Banks. And keep in mind, that was Kelvin Banks as a true freshman in his second ever game. So Will Anderson Jr. is one of the best edge rushers in the NFL right now, said that a true freshman Kelvin Banks in his second ever game was the hardest assignment he's ever had in his career. In his junior year, 89.9 pass blocking grade. That was 4th among all tackles in the nation last year. And keep in mind, that 89.9 pass blocking grade was against some elite defensive lines. He had a murderer's row of defensive lines on that Texas schedule last year, like Ohio State and Georgia and all those schools. And Kelvin Banks Jr. still dominated all of those defensive lines too. So again, I loved him. And another thing I love about him going to New Orleans, you allowed Talisa Fuanga, last year's first-round pick, to move back to right tackle, where he dominated at Oregon State at right tackle. He could play left tackle for the Saints as a rookie. Now he can play right tackle, and Calvin Banks can be your starting left tackle.
And to be honest, Fuaga didn't even look out of place last year at left tackle. He looked pretty good, but for him to get back to his natural position, I think the trial that we're going to see with Trevor Penning at left guard is going to be fun. Of the 3 areas that I look at with the Saints that they struggled with so badly last year, quarterback, and that was in part because of Derek Carr's injury, but that's not getting better. Offensive line and defensive line, I think you really feel like offensive offensive line is the one they could improve the most this year. Kelvin Banks, this year's first-round pick. Fuaga, last year's first-round pick. Penning at left guard. A healthy Eric McCoy, who was playing terrific football last year before he got hurt. Cesar Ruiz still at right guard. He's a constant there, at least an average player. I think you talk about an offensive line that maybe not necessarily this year in year one with a rookie and a guy in Penning who has struggled and Fuaga going into year two, back at his old position. Maybe not this year, but this is a unit that you feel like into the future can carry you into success, because that feels like a group, at least 4, if not all 5 of those guys are going to be around for a bit. So I think especially the tackle duo gives you a lot of hope. But I like at least the way this is shaping out. Obviously, still questions again at quarterback, at defensive line. Eventually, I don't know when, eventually we're going to have questions at running back because Alvin Kamara is not getting younger. There's some young pieces in the secondary, but their offensive line, I think, is what Kellen Moore is hoping carries them into future success beyond this season.
So unfortunately, not a very optimistic best bet for the Saints in 2025. The best bet this year from Ben Lindsay is the Saints to finish last in the NFC South, which is minus 135 on FanDuel right now. He says obviously a lot of uncertainty at quarterback and even receiver with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed coming off of injury. And then you have obviously the division favorites in the Buccaneers to talk about next on this show. And then also the arrow, like we mentioned before, is kind of pointing up for the Falcons and Panthers right now. It doesn't feel like it's pointing up for the Saints, at least in 2025. So they right now project as one of the worst teams in the NFL, let alone the NFC South. So at minus 135, I like that bet too, as the Saints to probably be the worst team in the division this year.
They walk into every game they play, to me right now, with a quarterback disadvantage. You look at, okay, their offensive line, I'd put it 4th out of 4 in this division. Their defensive line, if we have questions about the Falcons and Panthers defensive lines, we have at least similar questions, and
we ranked it 32nd.
And the thing with those two teams is I might have questions about them, but at least they did add a significant number of pieces. The Saints really didn't make any major additions to their defensive line, right? That was an argument during the draft. Could they also go defensive line 9th overall, or even in the second round instead of a quarterback? Where's that going? So you look at that, you look at how young their secondary is. Look how many guys are coming off injury on offense. How many of those guys are going to play full seasons and be okay? So I think this is a team with way more questions than answers right now, and it feels like a developmental year. I think that is a bet that makes a lot of sense, considering a lot of the good things, like you mentioned, we've said about the other teams in this division so far.
So we did offseason rankings here at PFF, and it's the worst quarterback situation in the NFL. We could all agree on that. Running backs 21st, receiving core 23rd, offensive line 22nd, defensive line 32nd, secondary 20th. The only one that's even above 20th is linebacker unit at 8th. So a very good linebacker unit, but that might not be enough to help you from not being the worst team in the NFL.
And it's a great linebacker unit with the best player and the captain of it being 36 years old.
Yeah.
That's been part of the Saints' problem is ever since Drew Brees retired, it still feels like they haven't had much of a post-Drew Brees plan, and they keep pushing the salary cap down the line. They keep throwing extensions at guys and restructures at guys, and they've just never embraced at any point having a full reset. And if you don't embrace a full reset when you need to have it, it's going to kind of be forced upon you. It feels like that's where we've gotten with the Saints here. And even something like extending Alvin Kamara just to create cap space. I love Alvin Kamara. He's been a great player for a long time, but we're going into, year 9 of Alvin Kamara? I think he said 27. We're going into year 9 of Alvin Kamara. How much longer? How much longer can you ride this without having successors? Because they haven't drafted great in recent years either. So the Saints, again, I think this is a developmental year. If Kellen Moore can find some foundational pieces, then that'll be a success. But there's a lot of questions right now about this team and their ability to win games. So
the Saints right now on DraftKings have a win total set at 4.5, which is actually the lowest in the NFL in 2025. Are they going over or under that, Dalton? And what is the bottom line for the Saints this year?
I think I'm going to go under that. I think there is a real chance that the Saints have the number 1 pick in next year's draft. I look at them. I look at Cleveland. I know Tennessee has Cam Ward, but I still think it's possible with some of the questions on their roster. I know some people, the Giants, but I actually really like the Giants' defense. They're going to keep them in a lot of games. And I know the next question you're about to ask. You're already about to ask me the question.
With Arch Manning staying until 2027 NFL draft, with Doug Nussmeier as the OC in the Saints, do they take Garrett Nussmeier, keep him home in Louisiana,
well,
the LSU quarterback?
On the first one, though, I know what we've heard Archie Manning say, but if the Saints were the team picking, would that change the equation for Arch? And like you mentioned, with his dad being the offensive coordinator, Garrett Nussmeier, if he has a great year at LSU, is going to be in contention, for that number one.
Louisiana kid too, from Louisiana, goes to LSU.
Exactly, right. Just keep it going, and maybe that's what I think this could get down, especially if we're already questioning. Because to me, when they drafted Tyler Shuck with a top 40 pick, I went, okay, he's going to start. They believe in him enough to start. They didn't take him in the first round because they're picking 9th overall. They wanted to do that. They wanted Kelvin Banks. They believe in him to start. The reports right now, and I would agree with even what we saw in the first preseason game, is that Spencer Rattler is going to start. And we didn't see a whole lot of great from Spencer Rattler last year.
Kellen Moore did not draft Spencer Rattler either. He drafted Tyler Shuck.
Also true.
Yeah.
So and Tyler Shuck, I know quarterbacks are different. Being 26 years old next month, it's hard to convince yourself to sit Tyler Shuck for a year or two with the idea that, okay, when he's 28 or 29, then he'll be our guy. It was why I questioned the pick on top of, me and with Shedeur Sanders and all of that.
Yeah.
But if this team is picking top 3 or number 1 next year, you feel like it's going to be another quarterback, and that it's concerning. I mean, the fact that Rattler is winning this job at the moment is concerning to me.
Yeah.
Because of the pick they spent on Shuck. And again, when they drafted him, I was like, okay, they're going to start Tyler Shuck.
Right.
They're just going to do it even just to do it. I don't know if that's the case. We'll see over the next couple preseason weeks. Nothing is decided, but it's concerning.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's already a question before we've even started the season, and I don't think either of them looked great last week. I think it's possible the Saints are picking first next year.
I think it's possible, definitely. We actually have them projected to win 5.4 games on PFF.com right now, which is tied with the Browns for the fewest in the NFL. So, yeah, I think it's certainly possible that the Saints have the number 1 overall pick next year. I'll also go under that win total, too. It looks pretty bleak for New Orleans. But also, listen, they've kicked the can down the road in terms of salary cap for the last however many years since Drew Brees retired. They're finally kind of bottoming out right now and finally maybe getting some top-end talent coming in, some top-end cheap talent, which is important too for them coming into hopefully in the next few years. So this is necessary for the Saints after how long they refused to bottom out in the NFL. Now it's necessary to be one of the worst teams in the league for probably a couple or if not a few years in the NFL.